is what's going on now is the treaty, most people call the pandemic treaty. Negotiations are going on this week, next week, then they're going to take a 2-week break. They're going to come back for another 2 weeks. And because they're having difficulty reaching agreement, they're talking about having additional negotiations into March, April, maybe even into May. And I want to make sure people distinguish between the two separate tracks. There are negotiations for amendments to the international health regulations, which are separate from the new pandemic treaty. Now, we've talked about before that the deadline to reveal to the nations what the final package of amendments to be considered in May has already passed. They failed to propose any package of amendments by January 27th of this year, a couple of weeks ago, which is 4 weeks in advance of the May 27th start of the assembly. And there is a rule, Article 55 in the International Health Regulations, saying that they have to do so 4 months in advance. So arguably, if they were, likely to follow their own rules, they missed their deadline and they should not be able to even consider amendments at the upcoming World Health Assembly in May. Now, there are 12 points in the new version of the pandemic treaty that I'm just going to touch on very quickly, but the core of what I want to get across to people is you can actually read these documents. Please listen to what we're talking about, but go to the source and see for yourself what these documents actually say. It looks, to me, like a financial venture capital prospectus to build out the pharmaceutical hospital emergency industrial complex in places like Africa or other low income nations. So number one on the list is that while people call this a treaty or an accord or by many other names, they've always said from the beginning that they want it to be a framework convention. And that really matters because what that means is they can agree to anything, but what they're really agreeing to is in Chapter 3, which is an ongoing yearly meeting, a conference of the parties, very similar to the Framework Convention for Climate Change, where in 1992, all the nations signed on to a framework, but then year after year after year, that framework gets filled in with details that we, the people, don't have any input into. Now, they want to create a massive bureaucracy. They don't call it the Conference of the Parties in the newest version. They call it the governing body of the pandemic agreement. And they've got at least 10 other committees that they would want to create. Again, as David Bell said, they want to put billions of dollars into this to massively expand, big pharma. But the core that they're having great difficulty with is what they call a pathogen access and benefit sharing system. If you look at this sideways, it looks very close, to the proliferation of biological weapons. They want to use the One Health surveillance approach to go seeking out pathogens with pandemic potential. That's their term. Bring it into a WHO coordinated laboratory network. They want to oversee gain of function. Believe it or not, that's in this document. And then they want to speed up the approval of products to treat these problems, which may or may not be causing death or disease. They may just be having the potential to do so. And then oversee a global supply chain and logistics network to deliver these products as the WHO directs. Now, there's not much talk at this point because the United States is working on speeding up regulatory approval and holding Big Pharma liable for any of these problems. They want to throw public money at that. The USA apparently was negotiating or dealing with those changes, and those articles, Articles 14 and 15, are not yet available. But in addition to the attempts to censor any countering views, what I encourage everyone to do, I've put it all up on stopthetreaty.org, stopthetreaty.org. Read the document. Be careful when you read Chapter 1, because you might end up getting diabetes because the language is so sickeningly sweet. It's just filled with propaganda They figure people will start reading it, only read chapter 1, think, hey, it sounds pretty good. The sleep inducing meat of it in chapter 2, if you read a chapter, an article a night, you won't need a sleeping pill or any kind of sedative for about a month and a half. But you really want to read chapter 3, because that's where they would set up this zombie bureaucracy that would meet year after year after year to decide how to disperse all of this money. And there's no audit trail. And I think the simplest point is Tedros recently said that he has the WHO has a 20,000 square meter distribution point in Dubai. Just think about how many soccer fields that might be, and imagine how much it would cost to get contracts to fill such a facility with pandemic related products. This is a business deal, and it's as corrupt as anything you could possibly imagine. This is organized crime in its development phase.
Yeah, James, thank you very much for that. David, let me just bring you back to see if you've got any final comments on what we've covered since in the last couple of minutes.
It's what James said. Essentially, this is built on air. It's an industry. They're building a self-perpetuating mechanism which will absorb huge amounts of funding. It must find reasons for its existence in order to survive. So it will spread fear about exaggerated risk of outbreaks, and it will use that to sort of get more money, more funding, and keep this mechanism going. And it needs to be, there needs to be a pause, essentially. Countries need to stop. There's no reason whatsoever to have these instruments go forward, as James said, in May for a vote at the World Health Assembly. They're not ready. As we showed through the University of Leeds work, there's a lot of misrepresentation of data within these and justifying these. So everyone needs to step back. There's no rush in this. There's a huge opportunity cost because other diseases such as malaria, tuberculosis that kill very large numbers of people, diabetes, they will suffer in order to move money to these very small, very rare problems, which we're now building a whole industry around.
Okay, brilliant. Thank you, David. Thank you, James. We need to move on now. Thank you very much for joining us today. Okay, if you like what the UK Column does, if you would like to support us, please head over to support.ukcolumn.org. There are options to help us there, and that would be very much appreciated. You could pick something up at the UK Column shop, but please share anything you find on the various platforms, especially ukcolumn.org, ukcolumnextracts.co.uk. Now, yesterday I was speaking to David Siegel on climate science, and if you haven't seen that discussion yet, please do go and have a look at that. And a quick reminder that on Sunday this week we'll be holding a symposium on Midazolam entitled The Midazolam Murders, Exposing State-Sanctioned Involuntary Euthanasia. Join us for that if you possibly can. That will begin at 6 p.m. UK time on Sunday evening. And tomorrow, we don't have a graphic for it, but tomorrow at 1 p.m. there'll be a discussion with Brian and Diane Rasmussen-McCaddy, one of the Gutsy Women series. Do join at 1 p.m. for that as well. Now back to you, Vanessa.